Imagine a king who was locked up and betrayed, and whose death was so mysterious that scholars have been trying to figure it out for hundreds of years. The murder of King Edward II is not only one of the most puzzling events in English history, but it also has a horrible story of betrayal, political plotting, and maybe even a horrible way of killing. Why did his closest friends plan such a horrible death? And why is the story of his death still so mysterious? Let's look into the ideas that continue to stump both historians and fans as we try to figure out the strange and shocking details of King Edward II's death. It is very uncommon for the assassination of a monarch to disrupt the fundamental foundations of a nation, and the peculiar assassination of King Edward II of England is not an exception to this rule. Edward's death in 1327 is still considered to be one of the most mysterious and dramatic occurrences in history. It is also known for the strange circumstances that surrounded it and the contentious ideas that have been proposed about it. The mysterious death of King Edward II is investigated in depth in this video, which dives into the political intrigues, odd circumstances, and the continuing mystery that has surrounded his death for centuries. The duration of Edward II's reign. After his father, Edward I, passed away in 1307, Edward II became the succeeding monarch of England and ascended to the throne. Nevertheless, his reign was marked by political upheaval and warfare throughout its entirety. As a result of his unconventional approach to government, his strong relationship with his favorites, most notably Piers Gaveston and Hugh Despencer, and the fact that he frequently faced opposition from powerful nobility, Edward II's rule was frequently at risk. Not only did the nobles have a strong aversion to these favorites, but their influence over the king was also a contributing factor in the occurrence of a number of rebellions and political instability. During the reign of Edward, he suffered a string of disasters in the Scottish Wars, the most notable of which was the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. These defeats further damaged his support among the English elite. At the beginning of the 1320s, Edward was subjected to increasing pressure from both his subjects and his own family, which resulted in a weakening of his authority and an increase in unrest. The disappearance of King Edward II. Queen Isabella, who had been estranged from her husband Edward, and her lover, Roger Mortimer, began a rebellion against the monarch in the year 1326. This was the moment when the issue reached its greatest point. Isabella had been growing increasingly dissatisfied with Edward's reign and his favoritism, and her relationship with Mortimer offered the essential political and military support to challenge Edward's power because it allowed her to question Edward's authority. Edward I was removed from power in January of 1327 as a result of the successes of the uprising. The declaration of Edward I, his young son, as king was made, and Isabella and Mortimer were appointed to serve as regents. In Gloucestershire, the fortification known as Berkeley Castle, which is renowned for its tough defenses and secluded position, was the spot where Edward I was held captive. A terrible and weird chapter in English history began with his incarceration, which marked the beginning of the chapter. There has been a great deal of discussion and intrigue over the reasons behind Edward's imprisonment, as well as the events surrounding his death, the strange accidents that led to Edward's demise. For centuries, the death of Edward II has been the subject of a great deal of speculation and discussion due to the fact that it is cloaked in mystery. According to the official records, Edward I passed away in Berkeley Castle on September 21, 1327. It is generally believed that he passed away due to natural causes. Nevertheless, this story has been called into question by historians and researchers who have pointed out the strange circumstances that surrounded his passing. The notion that Edward I was assassinated is the one that has received the most attention, and the manner in which he committed his murder is particularly terrible. According to some versions, Edward was put to death by having a red-hot poker inserted into his body. This form of execution was purportedly designed to leave no visible signs and, as a result, avoid suspicion. If this terrible procedure was actually used, it would have been done with the intention of avoiding a public scandal and keeping up the appearance of a natural death. Despite the fact that various historical sources and chroniclers have provided support for the concept that Edward was murdered with a red-hot poker, the theory continues to be disputed. The majority of the information in this story comes from the works of later historians as well as stories that circulated among the nobles and the court. There are no records that have been kept up until now that confirm this harsh approach, which has led to a substantial amount of disagreement regarding its truth, evidence, and the testimony of the witnesses. The lack of tangible proof and witnesses who can be trusted has contributed to the proliferation of rumors around the death of Edward II. There is a great deal of uncertainty around his passing due to the fact that the historical documents from that time period are scant and frequently inconsistent. A further element of mystery is added to the situation by the fact that Queen Isabella and Roger Mortimer were involved in Edward's demise. It was in both of their best interests to make sure that Edward was killed, as his continuing presence may pose a challenge to their authority over the younger Edward II and their ability to maintain their grip on power. As a result of this political reason, some historians have come to the conclusion that Edward's execution was strategically planned in order to eliminate a prospective rival and more firmly establish their authority over the kingdom. Theories and the controversy to consider. Over the course of several centuries, numerous hypotheses and conjectures have been proposed in response to the enigma surrounding the death of Edward II. Some people believe that Edward may have escaped from Berkeley Castle and lived in hiding, and that the death that was reported was a cover-up for his escape. Despite the fact that there is no substantial evidence to back up these allegations, this notion is bolstered by stories of sightings of Edward in numerous locales after his claimed death. And further argument proposes that Edward E. was murdered in order to prevent the disclosure of a covert scandal or political maneuver. According to this idea, Edward's killing was a method of keeping him from revealing sensitive information that may have led to the destabilization of the ruling government. This argument implies that Edward's death was a consequence of this. The inheritance of Edward E's legacy. The peculiar assassination of British monarch Edward E. has left an indelible mark on the history and literature of England. There have been a great number of works of fiction and historical research that have been inspired by the mystery that surrounds his death. Each of these works investigates a different element of his life and death. The lasting interest with Edward's tragic story is highlighted by the fact that his reign and the events surrounding his death have been the topic of plays, novels, and studies conducted by academics. In addition, the legacy of Edward II is mirrored in the larger framework of medieval politics and the manner in which overthrown rulers were dealt with. It is important to remember that political power battles during this time period were frequently cruel and ruthless, and his death, whether it was the result of a murder or natural causes, serves as a reminder of this. There was a great deal of mystery surrounding his passing, which highlights the intricacies of medieval politics and the lengths that individuals will go to in order to secure their positions of power. There is no doubt that the peculiar assassination of King Edward II continues to be one of the most intriguing and contentious events in the history of England. The unique circumstances surrounding his passing, in conjunction with the political unrest and personal rivalries that were prevalent during that time period, have resulted in a variety of ideas and guesses on the actual events that took place. Regardless matter whether Edward E. was killed in a terrible and covert manner or passed away due to natural causes, his passing continues to captivate the imaginations of historians as well as readers. As we reflect on the life and death of Edward II, we are reminded of the murky and complicated nature of historical events, which are frequently difficult to understand. It is a reflection of the larger themes of power, politics, and the lengths to which individuals would go in order to secure their positions that the mystery surrounding his murder provides. There is no doubt that the mystery surrounding King Edward E. continues to be an intriguing chapter in the annals of history. It provides a view into a volatile and fascinating moment in the history of England. Fascinated by historical mysteries? Subscribe now and turn on notifications to catch more deep dives into the most intriguing and baffling stories from history. Don't miss out on our latest videos uncovering secrets from the past.